All right, Alexander, let's do the Q&A for the live stream we did with Levan Gudadze. And let's start things off with Andrea, who says, could the US still use countries close to Russia to try to keep the war going in the face of peace efforts by China, countries like Georgia and Serbia especially? How can this be prevented?
I think we discussed this over the course of the program. The answer is they are going to try and use countries like Georgia and Serbia and all kinds of other countries to create problems. Moldova is perhaps the one to look at most keenly. But for the moment, this problem has been contained. And it needs to be said that there's an awful lot of people in these countries who do not want to see their countries drawn into this conflict either. So there's push from the United States to get these countries involved, but there's also push from many of the local people to prevent them doing so. And in the case of Georgia, I'm not going to say that they're tilting towards Russia. I think that'd be an exaggeration, but the government, backed by most of the population, seems to be determined to keep Georgia out of the conflict. Moldova, by contrast, it seems to me, is going down into a spiraling crisis with a government that's now largely supported by the police and a few oligarchs, and a population that's becoming increasingly unhappy.
Zariel says, Levan, it's great to have you here. Sanjeva says, thanks, Alex and Alexander, for all that you are doing. God bless you both. Joint OSRS says, Alex, since I've started watching you, you have become very gray. Don't work too hard, old man.
Which Alex is that?
I think me. Yeah. I think me. So a little gray.
Well, we work very. We do work very hard. We are very hardworking people, but we're all right. We're fine, both of us.
Elena says Iraq is leaving the dollar. At this rate, can the USA afford all these confrontations with everybody?
No, it can't. I mean, well, for the moment it can, in the sense that it can print money to cover that. But my own view about this is that we're drawing to the end of this. This is the last confrontation, the last conflict in which the United States, because of the exorbitant privilege that the dollar gives it as the reserve currency, is able to print its way through a war. I doubt that it will be able to do that for much longer, and the fact that it's doing it over the course of this war has accelerated the move away from that position. So I think we're coming to the end of that period.
Joyce, thank you for that super sticker. Sanjeva says, Levan, why do you think the Russian MOD and government doesn't take information warfare PR seriously? Proper PR or better development of soft power could have won Russia more allies and even prevented war, don't you think?
Well, I think Levan answered that question,
yeah,
actually.
Yes. Gary says, thank you, Duran. I've enjoyed your shows many years, but this is my first live feed. Thank you both, Alex, for bringing all of our streams at Levan. Thank you for your honest views. Thank you, Gary, for that. Dan Walda says, thank you for all your great work. Thank you, Dan, very, very much. JB6802 says, all my favorites together. Zariel, thank you for that super sticker. Black Tie, thank you for that super sticker. Thank you very much for that, Black Tie. Ralph, thank you for that super chat. Sanjeva says, Russian MOD can embed loyal journalists in frontline troops, which could enhance the Russian narrative. I do not mean freelance war bloggers, but by not doing this, people like Prigozhin and Western journalists sow confusion.
Well, they do embed some journalists. I mean, if you go to Redovka, which is a Russian newspaper based in Smolensk, and which covers the war very extensively, I mean, they're clearly getting information from journalists who are embedded, and I understand that they're some of their own journalists, and they are some of the most interesting and reliable reporters from the war. I'm going to say something. I think you have to understand something about Russian culture, which is that if you are a journalist, a Russian journalist, even from a pro-government newspaper or television channel, because of the long history of state control of the media in Russia, the way you gain credibility is not by being absolutely loyal in the way that journalists are in the West. It's actually by kicking back a bit. So it doesn't work in quite the way that you might expect it to, compared to the way it works in the West. But can I just say, on the specific subject of the quarrel with Prigozhin, one of the reasons I was skeptical about some of Prigozhin's claims was precisely because there were journalists on the scene who were basically saying, look, we have great respect for Prigozhin, we think he's a fantastic person and all that, but he is overstating the realities about the ammunition shortage that he's talking about. And in fact, over the last couple of weeks, last week especially, we've seen that that is right.
Renee, thank you for that super sticker. John Dickinson says, war sucks. Nick Mastelovich says, great to see you live. Thank you for the great work. Kevin Heath, thank you for that super chat. P. Walker says, Patriots can't even stop rocket attacks from Houthis. Anyone think it can stop something from a genuine military? And Alex K says, Levan, how is the situation in Georgia and where are things heading, considering there is a lot of pressure on the government to align with the West?
I think, again, Levan talked about that, actually. I'm going to add my own personal view. I think that the mood in Georgia has shifted a lot over the last couple of years, in the sense that I think after 2008, the 2008 war, and, the fall of Saakashvili, I think there has been a steadily strengthening pendulum swing. There are still some very fervid people who want to go back to the full alignment with the West. And there's my brother, who has been many times to Georgia. He knows the country very well. Tells me the place is absolutely crammed with Western-funded NGOs. He says the Saakashvili government that existed before, he fell, was, spoken of at the time as the NGO government. It was basically run by the NGOs. All the people who worked for it were people who came from Western-oriented NGOs. Now, the present government hasn't yet acted to clear out these people. I'm sorry to be brutal about that. So they are still there. They are still able to organise. They can still bring out a large crowd, and they can still be very disruptive. But they are gradually losing influence and control over Georgia. And one of the major reasons is because relations between Georgia and Russia historically have been so close, and because there are so many Georgians who live successfully in Russia, Levan being one. And of course they communicate with their people back home, and that this is a constant dialogue that continues.
This guy's really the worst thing to ever happen to Georgia, that guy.
Absolutely.
What a disaster he was. The protege of McCain, John McCain, should tell you everything. Janya Williams says, Levan, have you heard of the Fatima prophecies and Russia's role in the world? What do you think of this? Thanks.
Right, well, as we remember, Levan hadn't heard about them. I'm going to simply say something about them. Yes, I'm going to simply say something about them, which is that in Russia itself, the very few people who have heard of this are embarrassed by it. It's not something that Russians themselves take very seriously, the Fatima prophecies. And I mean, bear in mind, this is an Orthodox country. That's a Catholic thing. And I don't think that they're very attracted to it. That's my impression.
Jared, thank you for that super sticker. Paul Walker says, fantastic analysis. Rick F., thank you for that super chat. T.I., thank you for that super chat. Raymond Piper says, Zelensky Grad. Thank you for that, Raymond. Zahir Shaki, thank you for that super chat. Sparky says, great work. Rick F says, and they are 100% captured and Ukrainians hold a few buildings, yet yesterday the New York Times headline was gains near Bakhmut to raise Ukrainians' hope of turning the tide.
Absolutely. And now, can I just say, I mean, that we made the program with Levan just before the confirmation came through that Bakhmut had entirely fallen, that it had been fully captured by the Russians. And you could see the problem because, of course, the way the media in the West was spinning the story right up until the moment when Bakhmut fell was that Bakhmut was going to result in a defeat of the Russians. So how do you come back and explain to the Western public, who's been told to expect a Russian defeat, a Russian victory? It's from a narrative point of view, a disaster. And you can see that they're now trying to sort of tiptoe around this problem. The Guardian yesterday was still claiming that there's fighting going on in one particular district in Bakhmut, and they've even got, journalists in the Guardian, commentators talking about it with each other, discussing, what this all means. And of course, it's completely unreal. There's no reality to it, but there you go. That's what happens when you take all your stories, your entire coverage of the war from one side, from the Ukrainian side, at the Duran, we look at both sides. We do.
Iskander says, is there a possibility of military coup in Ukraine?
I can only say this. I think only with the support of the United States. It's not entirely to be discounted. And the fact that General Zaluzhny has disappeared, doesn't want to be seen, is keeping a very, very low profile. Does make me wonder what he's up to, actually. I mean, it might suggest that he's positioning himself for some move in the future. Possible. I mean, we've seen it happen in other places. I would have thought that, Ukraine is certainly the kind of place where a sudden political change might very easily happen. The problem is, again, coming back to the narrative, Zelensky has been spun in the media as this extraordinary, heroic figure. That's what most of the Western public now believes him to be. He's behaving ever more eccentrically. I mean, I don't know if anybody saw the photograph of the coffin that's now been, even the New York Times apparently has now found that a rather difficult one to understand, but apparently he provided the G7 with a picture of himself traveling in a coffin or something. I mean, very weird. I mean, his behavior is getting more and more eccentric, but just getting rid of him from one day to the next, especially, with a coup, would be, again, a very, very hard spin.
Doc Holliday says, thanks for the propaganda-free updates. Danielle says, do you think Zaluzhny will be back from his friend's wedding any day soon?
Well, this is the longest wedding I've ever known, actually. I mean, I wonder how long it will continue for, because he seems to be very determined to see these celebrations through to their conclusion.
Andreas Ferenci says, Hungarian Foreign Minister Szijjártó announced that they had enough of Ukraine and are going to block any further EU sanctions and help for Ukraine. Is it realistic? What will Brussels do about it?
No, they won't. I mean, it isn't realistic. They'll find a way to get the sanctions together. I mean, to my mind, the Hungarians are now clearly, and I think intentionally, caught in danger. What I can easily see happen is moves to suspend Hungary's voting rights on the European Council in order to enable these sanctions and support and all the rest to just continue to go through. And that could very well be the start of Hungary starting to take steps to distance himself from the EU and perhaps even leave. I mean, I wouldn't discount that now.
Iris Enamorado says, thanks for inviting Mr. Levan. Jack Ridley, thank you for that awesome super sticker. Easy A says, are we are we all officially in Cold War 2.0?
Yes, I think we are. And I mean, I'm going to say something. I mean, there was a very difficult time in the early 1980s during the Cold War, but it wasn't as bad then as it is now. Relations now between Russia and the West and between China and the West are worse than I have ever known them. Much worse than they were during the Cold War.
Lynn Tupas, thank you for that super sticker. John Dickinson says, distinguishing people from their governments seems to come easily to the Russian people, something very rare in the West.
We've discussed that. And again, I want to just reiterate again what I said. Read Russian literature and you see how hardwired in the Russian mindset that is.
DF says, how does BlackRock gas asset acquisitions impact Russian objectives in Western Ukraine? U.S. courts in New York have seized assets in Cuba and Argentina.
Well, I mean, I think we discussed this before. I don't think it's going to make any effect at all on Russian policy.
Doc Holliday says, what Ukrainian offensive? LOL.
Well, don't be in too much of a hurry. My impression from the G7 meeting in Hiroshima was that Biden basically ordered Zelensky to launch this offensive. Zelensky doesn't want to do it, but Biden said, enough's enough, you've got to do it now. So I think there will be an offensive.
Ram V says, how can Russia rebuild its military reputation? Thanks.
By winning the war, as Levan said.
Jetset.1 says, as long as the Western leaders can go on PR visits in Kiev, they have a platform to provide weapons, and the Azovs have a platform to terrorize the people within Ukraine. Go for the head, not the arms.
We discussed this in the program, and I think we went into explanations of why the Russians so far have not done this. I mean, let me repeat again. Getting rid of people like Zelensky from a Russian point of view serves no useful purpose. He's just been on this world tour, which has been a shambles. It's had a bad effect on the world. The last person really angry about him is President Lula of Brazil, for example. So why replace this person who is working to help Russia mobilize public opinion onto its side around the world?
Doug, thank you for that super sticker. Elena Diaz says, NATO and Finland, what is Russia thinking about that?
Yeah, I think that this is a concern, but I'm going to also say something else. I have heard this said by some people in Russia, that Finland joining NATO actually simplifies Russian military planning. It means that if there is a conflict, that the Russians now have proper grounds to take action in Scandinavia, which they would not otherwise do. Let us pray and hope it never comes to anything like that.
Marilyn Hudson says, thank you, Alex and Alexander, for having Levan on, a man whose life Georgia attempted to destroy for reporting the truth.
I didn't know that. Yeah.
Thank you, Marilyn, for that. Elza says, if Zelensky is really gone, would that change anything to the conflict?
No. I think we discussed this over the course of the program.
Andreas says, Hungarian government repeatedly said in the past that they would like Hungary to be a sort of bridge between the West and Russia. Is that still realistic? What is the Russian view on Hungary?
No, I think the Russians will never forget Hungary and what it did for them. And I think Levan made that point over the course of the program. So Hungary and Russia have become much closer. Another country, by the way, which historically has not had good relations with Russia. Turkey being one, Hungary being another. And we see how under the pressure of the West, of the Western powers, they've gradually shifted their views. So just to say that. But becoming a bridge between Russia and the West, not happening. The West is intent on burning all the bridges.
Popusa, thank you for that super sticker. Elena says, Levan, Russians remain friendly towards the West, you say, but do they trust the West after Nord Stream?
No, they don't. They don't trust the West, not just because of Broad Stream, but because of the entire history going all the way back to the end of the Cold War and even beyond.
Kilo, good thoughts, says, no, thank you for the super sticker, Kilo, good thoughts. And JB6802 says, is Russian society horrified by the pushing of sexual education on young children in the US? I think kids have a better childhood in Russia.
I think Levan answered that question.
Levan answered that. Rafik Adams says, great podcast. Can you guys do a roundtable with E. Michael Jones to discuss their respective books? Jones, Barron, Metal, The Conflict Between Usury and Labor, and Dr. Hudson, The Collapse of Antiquity.
Absolutely, I would love to, and I think we will try.
We'll try. And Rafik Adams says, my request relates to American empire as a repeat of Roman and Greek imperial expansion using debt and failed to protect labor classes from exploitation.
There are a lot of similarities with Rome, but you mustn't push this too far. I mean, there are also a lot of very big differences. We are talking about very, very different societies, but certainly Rome did have an issue with debt. And the other thing that did happen, and I speak as someone, I haven't read Michael Hudson's book, latest book about this, but what I can say, as somebody who takes a great interest in classical history, is that one of the things that did happen towards the end of the Roman Empire is the incredible degree to which wealth became concentrated in a very, very small number of people. I mean, the senatorial class, the oligarchy, if you like, of the late Roman Empire were the richest people in human history until today, proportionate to the others. And what happened was people became so immiserated and inequalities became so extreme that the people who were outside this golden circle eventually just gave up. They said, what's the point? Because we're going to lose whatever happens. And that was played a very major part in the collapse of the Roman Empire in the West. In the East, it was a bit different.
Marian Demhad says, anyone noted as missing since the bunkerbuster bomb in Kiev a few weeks ago? NATO, Ukraine, top brass.
I think I answered that question over the course of the program. The answer is no.
All right, those are all the questions from the live stream we did with Levan. Thank you very much.